Welcome to the Next Level Podcast, powered by San Manuel, a series connecting you with the best minds in casino, hospitality, tribal government, and beyond. Enjoy the show.
Sarah Webster, Vice President of Accounting and Finance at Yaamava Resort and Casino. It's so awesome to have you on Next Level finally. Welcome.
I know. Long time this has been coming, but I'm excited. So good morning.
Good morning. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whatever time of day it is for you. Thank you for tuning in. Sarah, so as you know, we always begin this show with a 3-minute origin story. Tell us a little bit about yourself, where you grew up, your early interests, and how you got to where you're at today.
Sure. So I was born in Colorado, but I was mostly raised here in Southern California for all of my childhood. I spent a lot of time off-roading and RVing with my grandparents during the summer. So that kind of tied in a lot of my love for nature and adventure that I still carry through now. But then as I got a little older, I got a little more girly girl and shifted to cheerleading and dance and had some pretty amazing experiences with that. After high school, I thought for sure, I'm going to be a structural engineer. This is what I'm doing. I had a path. I was an engineering major. And then about a couple years in, I had some pretty significant life changes. And so I kind of took a step back and said, what do I want to do? What does my path look like? And I took a job as an administrative assistant at San Manuel at the time. And totally meant to be temporary. Let me just figure this out. But within weeks, I knew. I was like, I want to be a part of this. I want to keep going here. I really liked what the tribe was doing for the community that I grew up in, especially. And then the people, I loved gaming. People always say they get bit by the gaming bug, and that really happened for me. So I kind of dove head in. That's kind of what I do. So I went back to school, got my degree, got my CPA, and then at the same time, what I was doing was taking entry-level positions within accounting. So I tried accounts payable, payroll, revenue audit, general accounting. So I was doing all of that at the same time. And then by the time I had my CPA, I felt, okay, I'm ready for the next level. And then I worked my way through assistant controller, controller director, and then VP that I'm in now, which is really interesting. I've been in this role for about 2 years now, and I oversee operational compliance, revenue audit, general accounting for the property specifically, which I really enjoy. I really enjoy working for Yaamava and with Yaamava. So that's kind of where I'm at.
Awesome. Pulled on a lot of different things. And I think thing that I can kind of relate to is I've been in several different roles, and I think that really helped me to figure out what I'm passionate about. Would you like to speak a little bit to our audience about that? Just not being afraid to try different things to kind of see what sticks with you the most.
Absolutely. So I always tell folks who come to work in accounting that it's not linear. There's a lot, even if you decide like accounting is for me, there are so many aspects of accounting and finance, and same throughout the casino, right? There's a lot of things where you think one thing going in, and then you go to experience it and you think, oh, this is interesting. But then you pull on a string from somewhere else and you're like, what do they do over there? And it's perfectly fine. It's perfectly fine to kind of try new things and try new areas. Because if you don't feel in your heart that you're enjoying something, it's okay to try something new. And that's what I did. I'll be perfectly honest. Payroll was not my favorite area that I worked in, and that's fine. But I have the background now. I've done it. I managed them for years after that. So, I think finding what you are passionate about and finding as much as you can, right? I mean, when you're trying new things, you'll feel, in my heart, I believe that most people will feel a connection to a role and know this is, oh, I see, this is what I'm meant to do. So I don't think there's anything wrong with trying new things as long as you can learn something new from it and take it to your next role. That's the key.
No, I agree. And I also think there's nothing wrong with taking lateral positions to kind of really help expand your exposure to different parts and functions of the organization, wherever you are as a whole, right?
100%.
Was there an exact moment that you knew that accounting was for you?
So I really, at first it was the people. It was purely just people. I loved who I was working with, all of that. And it wasn't necessarily accounting specific. But then in 2005, we built the new casino. So the casino in its current location, it had been across the street. So when we built that location, and I was in charge of getting on the accounting side, getting the building up and running, opening the casino that way. And I thought, wow, this is, when you're in accounting, you get to see the big picture. You get to see all aspects of it. And I thought, yeah, I get it. This is really cool. It's problem solving for all these different areas. So that was pretty influential on me kind of realizing, oh, like, I like accounting a lot. It's not just the people. It's not just working for the casino that I enjoy. It's the actual accounting.
And we've talked about several times on the show, and I know you and I have personally talked about just finding a mentor and how important that is. Can you tell us a little bit about, I think you've had a few influential people that you've crossed paths with since you've joined your journey here. Can you talk to us a little bit about that and how maybe seeking a mentor, what are some key things to look for?
Sure. Yeah, I had actually, to be honest, some of my early influences were even before I started working here. My parents really instilled hard work. And so I like to think of them as my unofficial mentors in life, especially my mom was really big in career, which was interesting to see that role. And then my dad was all about grit and hard work and physical labor, which I didn't understand at the time, hated it, but that's fine. So I always say they're my first mentors. But in my career now, I was very lucky in the beginning to have the CFO and the controller at the time were both strong females. And it was inspiring to me to see them be at the table. And so one of them in particular took me under her wing. And she's the one who guided me toward the CPA license and the importance of that. But then along the way, as I got more into my career, I realized that it doesn't have to be your manager. It doesn't have to be someone in your direct line. A lot of my best lessons and a lot of my best mentoring has been done by folks outside of my department. And so I always recommend to people to get other perspectives, reach out to mentors within other areas. And so I've been very lucky with that I've had some operators who've kind of taken me in and guided me and helped me from that perspective, which I think made me stronger in my role. So I always let people know, yes, it makes sense a lot of times that it might be your manager, but it might not be.
Right.
And so just kind of be on the lookout for people with perspectives that might be different than yours, because I don't think you learn as much by getting mentored by somebody who thinks exactly like you. I think those other perspectives are what's helpful.
No, and I'm glad that you touched on that, because I never thought about that. My first mentor would technically be my dad. He's the one that instilled in me hard work, right? And then I've had some individuals that I've connected with in different organizations that haven't been in the same vertical as myself. And I think that does broaden your perspective and really give you that true insight you need to continually improve and do better, right?
100%.
So thank you for sharing that. So shifting gears just a little bit, what are the top 3 skill sets accountants should be focused on should they want to be in a role that is similar to yours?
So putting aside the education, which in this role, that's critical, but to me, that's a given. I'm going to move past that. But the actual soft skills and the things that I think are important, number one is integrity. I don't know if that's something, I feel like a lot of people either have that or maybe you don't. I'd like to think most people do, but in accounting, there are so many situations that you need to be trustworthy. So integrity is number one for me. If nothing else, integrity, the ability to collaborate. We do a lot of work with a lot of departments in projects. It's not just we're not just, doing the books like each month. There's a lot of collaboration, and that skill set is sometimes hard to find in an accountant. So I think the higher you go, the more important that is. And
Great.
sure. And then the last one is the ability to take a big problem and break it down into smaller problems. In accounting, we tend to have a lot of things come our way, and you have to be able to break it down into digestible chunks and solve each of those individually. And that's something that I look for. It's really hard to assess in someone, in an interview, but that is something that I look for as I'm mentoring others and stuff.
And I think that all three that you touch on, integrity, collaboration, and being able to problem solve, I think that's so imperative just in our organization as a whole anyhow, and especially in your role, because it does touch so many different departments, right? Well, every department technically.
Yes. Yeah, exactly.
What do you like, or what is your most favorite thing about working in your department or your specific role?
So my very favorite thing is that we touch on everything throughout the casino. So I'm a little nosy, so I like to know everything that's going on, and in everything that's in my realm, I should say. But I do enjoy being able to learn about the promotions that are happening, learning about what slots is doing on the floor, learning what all the other areas are doing, because they're relevant to my role. So I like that my role, because it kind of has like this spiderweb effect that I'm involved in a lot of things, satisfies the nosiness in me, where I get to learn a lot about other areas. So I don't know what that says about me, but it's true. So I that's one of my favorite things.
Okay, that makes sense, because I look at it as not being nosy, but just wanting to know things so that you can provide the best support possible, right? In all
100%.
ways. That's more so aligns with your personality than being nosy.
Yes, I call it professional curiosity.
I love it. How has accounting and finance evolved since you first started in the casino and hospitality industry?
So it's interesting. I was actually reflecting on this the other day. I was talking to some of the newer team members, and they don't know any different. So for them, this is just how it's always been. And in general, accounting is not the most trendy department, right? We don't have a lot of changes. IRS regulations go back to the 70s. They haven't changed them. So there's not a lot of changes in that way, but the casino itself has changed significantly. So much. Like I think about if you had walked the floor when I started in 2001 to now, it's a completely different floor. It's just the evolution of gaming itself has significantly changed. But for accounting specifically, I think the biggest change has been our shift in data. So before, when I first started, we spent so much of our day gathering data. So we were always in that gathering state because everything was manual. So you had to get data from triplicate forms still and things like that. So the other day I was reflecting that we used to come in, like my revenue audit team, they would come in and spend the first, 4 or 5 hours literally just getting the data to put into a spreadsheet. And now they come in and that's all ready for them because it's automated to some extent. Right. And then they get to spend more time, instead of in the gathering aspect, they get to spend more time in the analysis. And then that becomes more timely information that we can provide to operators. And I think it's an underappreciated change in our industry, that we've really shifted from gathering data to analyzing and using the data. And so I've seen, if I would have known where we were going in 2024, back in 2001, I think I'd be shocked on how much has improved. But it's kind of behind the scenes, right? It's not walking the floor and seeing all the new visuals in slot machines and things like that. But it is highly impactful to the business, that shift. So I'm excited to see where that goes, for sure.
Well, that's what I was going to ask you next. What are you most excited about when you think about the future and like where we came from and where we're going? Is there something that like makes you smile, that you're like, I can't wait for this or that to happen?
Yeah, I think honestly, for Yaamava, in specifically, I get excited because every time I think, oh, well, they can't top this, they go and they top it, and we top it. I shouldn't say they, we all top it.
Yeah.
So I'm excited just to see what's next. A lot of times, you know, I'm an accountant at heart. I'm not the most creative mind. So when all these amazing, inspirational people around come up with all these ideas, I think, oh my gosh, I never would have thought about. But then I'm on board, and I love seeing what's next. I absolutely love seeing the things they come up with to top what they've done in the past and what we've done in the past. We're excited for that. For accounting specifically, we have some new applications being implemented that I'm really excited about and that I think will have a significant impact on the business, hopefully positively. So I'm excited to see what that brings. That should be later this year. That gives me a nervous smile. You said what makes me smile? It gives me a nervous smile. I don't know if that counts. But yeah, those are the things that I look forward to, is the what's next and how I can contribute to that.
So that was going to be my next question, actually. How can leaders prepare for all these changes that are coming, and how can we prepare our teams as well?
So I think, you know, there's been a lot of talk. We've talked about it, about being proactive versus reactive. Mm-hmm. And I think that shift, especially in finance, that shift is a difficult one to make because a lot of what we do is reactive, right? We respond to what's happening in the business. But I think we've reached a point where we can no longer rely on being reactive. So I think looking forward and having early discussions and preparing for them and kind of thinking through within your area, how might future changes impact my team? How might it impact what we're working on, and prepare for it early? It's not always easy to do. We can't all share. Some things we're working on are confidential, to be honest. Right. And so it's hard to prepare sometimes, but being aware of what's happening in your industry, even before it gets to you. So, you know, reading the trades, reading articles, staying ahead of that. It sounds so simple, and I know that's not the most innovative answer, but it's true, because if somebody else is already doing it, then we're behind it already. So the second I get a whiff of somebody in accounting or in gaming is doing something, I'm immediately like looking into it, because it is hard. It is hard to prepare when you always feel like by the time you hear of something, you're behind it. So
that makes sense.
It's tricky.
So we're talking about preparing and just mentors and all different things. I think part of your success comes from your team and building a strong team. Is there key things that you look for when you're hiring individuals for your departments? Because you have several departments. You have several departments, so I know that there's probably different things depending on which department you may be hiring for.
Absolutely. There's definitely different things I look for based on the department that I'm hiring for, and also the role. A lot of times if I'm hiring a key management role, within the last year or so, I've hired 2 new directors in a couple of my areas. And I took a really long time to get those filled because I wanted the absolute right person. And in those situations, what I typically do is get feedback from their teams and kind of get a feeling for things they may have felt were missing or areas that they would like to grow. And I kind of look for those traits. I look for those traits in the leaders that I'm hiring. If the whole team is happy, and, you know, obviously besides the technical skill sets, those are a given, they have to have those. But if the team is happy and we're satisfying the needs of the team, I feel like all around we're going to be more successful.
Right.
So for those roles, I tend to get some feedback, and I'm looking for strong leadership. I'm looking for communication, being able to communicate. It's really difficult to assess in an interview, right? But as much as you can, the ability to communicate and how I think they would fit in with our department. and with the organization. Again, it's difficult to do. And then for entry level, just really eager and hungry folks that just want to learn. That I feel like I can notice right away in an interview. If somebody is curious, if they're asking questions during the interview, that is immediately is going to trigger something for me that like, oh, they have that professional curiosity that I look for. And so that is something I'm very attuned to in interviews, is that questioning.
So pulling on that a little bit more. So for someone that's interviewing for any roles specific to your area, any tips you would give them during the either when they're applying or when they're interviewing?
Ask questions. That is my number one tip for interviewing. It's not a bad thing. In my opinion, it's not a bad thing. I think that it shows that you want to learn more. Obviously, come prepared for the questions themselves. Be prepared. Be yourself is really important. You don't want to go in and represent somebody that you may be under perfect circumstances. You want to go and represent the person that you are, and that you can consistently be. Because if you get the interview, great, and then you get to that point, and then you get the job, and you can't perform, or you aren't the person that you represented, then nobody wins in that situation. So ask questions, be yourself, come prepared. I do have a pet peeve. When somebody interviews and they absolutely know nothing about Yaamava, I have such a pet peeve. So I always tell, like, at minimum, look at the website, look through what they're doing. And for us specifically, I'm not saying you have to know everything, but to know a little bit about us. And if you learn a little bit about the tribe, that's even better. But that is my biggest pet peeve, to come and say, well, I don't really know anything about Yaamava. And it's like,
there's so much information out there, to your point. So, and I mean, I've only been here since 2019 and we've evolved so much, right? So there's a lot to learn. And we do have, both the Yaamava Resort and Casino website and San Manuel Band of Mission Indians website. So you can really learn a lot about our culture as a whole, right? And how they both work together to create the business that we have today, right?
Right.
So once somebody comes on board, what do you think are the keys to building a strong team and creating that culture that we have here?
Consistency. So I think one of the things that I've noticed where teams tend to break down is when there's a lot of inconsistency, because then they don't feel like they are empowered to make any decisions, because there hasn't been consistency to say, oh, I already know that my manager is going to want this because it's been consistent in the past. So consistency, I think, is kind of an undervalued thing that needs to happen when you're team building. So consistency, meeting often in the beginning. It's I know it's hard. We all have to make time, but it's super important. One, to get, if somebody is going slightly off path, it's really important to bring it back. And then it also just, from a personal perspective, I feel like people work better when they know their colleagues better. And so in the beginning, I do lunches, I do things. I really want people personally to jive or whatever, because I think that goes into the teamwork aspect and it builds a more well-rounded team. So the social aspects, the communication aspects are super important in the beginning. Everything else, the decision making, all of those will come. We work through that. But for sure, building that unity is really important. I would say in the first 90 days, that's really super important.
No, I 100% agree. It's building that trust so that individuals are still not afraid to ask questions, right? You want to ask questions in the interview, but you want to still ask questions once you come on board and really expand upon your knowledge. And then also just creating that environment of trust to where they feel comfortable sharing ideas or thoughts. Maybe there's things in the process that we haven't seen, and them being new to the organization, they have ideas that we can bring to life, right? So I do agree that.
And it's funny that you bring that up, because we've had, we've hired, gaming is kind of small that way. People tend to kind of come and go from other gaming areas. So we have some folks that have been at other places. And while we don't, there is that professional line, we don't get into specifics of things that they did at other properties or anything. But their ideas are often really good. And they come with these ideas and you're like, did you guys do that before? And even if they didn't, it's just that they've had another perspective.
Yep.
And so I really love to hear their ideas. And I noticed I've had previous managers who, if you shared an idea and they didn't like it, they would immediately slam it down and be like, absolutely not. And then, of course, you're not going to share after that. So as much as we can, we like to make sure that everybody's voice is heard. And if we can pull on a string and take something a little bit further, we'll try. And if it doesn't work out, it doesn't work out. But that's a great point about people's ideas and being able to share them freely. It's really important in a team.
No, definitely. That's how we stay innovative, right? And continue to take things to the next level. And, we have to be able to make changes and be nimble. Speaking of changes, looking back, is there anything you would have done differently at any point in your career?
That's a hard question, Serena. So I want to say no, because I love where I'm at, I love what I'm doing. So your instinct is to say no, just keep everything the same. But I think there are things I could have done earlier that probably would have made the transition easier. Yeah. So I think when I did the transition from director to VP, I think there was, for me, a realization that there was not necessarily a gap, but definitely a change in levels as far as strategic thinking versus tactical, learning more about operations than just being behind the scenes. And I think looking back, if I had really thought about it, I would have, at the time that I was exploring all those different roles in accounting in the beginning, I would have liked to take like a front of house position somewhere on the floor to kind of get a perspective of somebody working on the floor. That's just, one thing that I look back and I think, if I had really known where I would end up, that might have been helpful. But, you don't know. You go through the path that you do, and you end up where you end up, and this is where I am. So I can't say I would change anything, because who knows? But that might have made the transition a little bit easier.
And speaking to that just a little bit, just so individuals know, even once you come onto a casino, there are some programs out there that kind of help you get familiar with the different departments. And I don't know if that was an option when you first started, because we've evolved so much since then, right? And so there are more opportunities and more venues as a whole. So, never be afraid to tap into the resources that your organization has to help you to continually evolve, right?
Absolutely. It's when I first started, we were very small. We were a bingo hall that had some slot machines. It was very small. So you got to be involved in a lot of things just because every department was small. You were physically close. I worked in a little office under the stairs in the bingo hall. So you were physically close to everything going on. But now we're much bigger. It's a lot trickier to do, but those official programs they have are fantastic. And I always encourage people, if your organization is willing to invest in you, take it wherever you can.
No, definitely. What is there one or two specific things that have helped you to be successful in your journey that you haven't already mentioned that you'd like to talk about?
I think I think tenacity, being tenacious and not giving up on things, is one of my traits that has gotten me into trouble in the past sometimes, but it benefits me for the most part. So not giving up and being really tenacious, and my dad, I go back to my dad and how, he was really, I never understood why he thought chores were so important. He used to prioritize chores over anything, the household chores. And I thought, I want to get home and do my homework. I want to focus, I was little miss overachiever at school, and that's all I wanted to do. And my dad was like pushing chores so much. And now looking back, I get it. It's the commitment to doing something. It's grit. It's all of those things. And those skill sets have helped me in my career and push through things when, sometimes like the people pleaser in me wants to just be like, okay, sure.
Yeah.
But then you have to push through, and that grit and that tenacity is kind of what gets you past those times.
What is your biggest pull or motivation?
People, just people that I work with. I'm so inspired by inspired people. So when people are inspired, that motivates me. And then people personally too, right? Like my family, they motivate me. My colleagues, my friends, you motivate me. I mean, so just people in general motivate me. Plus I'm a tad bit competitive, so competition motivates me. Sometimes I try to pretend I'm not a competitive person, but I think we've talked about it, that almost all of us are competitive, and that's kind of why we're in gaming and why, we are in the roles we're in. But yeah, people, I would say is just my number one motivator.
And then, your department's under a lot of deadlines, extremely like just hectic, busy all the time. How do you, in such a bustling environment, prioritize? Prioritize work and home. Sorry.
Exactly. That's the hard part. So work tends to prioritize itself in a weird way, especially for accounting, because we have things that naturally will take more precedence because they're regulatory, or we have closed deadlines that our auditors are waiting for, and things like that. So the work tends to prioritize itself if you do it right. And then projects by sort of the business impact or how soon they need to happen. The harder part is prioritizing that and balancing it with your home life, balancing it with, if you've gone back to school, that was a challenge, and that was, going to school full time and getting my CPA and balancing that. So I think the work prioritizes itself. It's just layering in the things that really matter, which are, those folks that you have at home, or the people you're taking care of that you're responsible for outside of work. Those are the things that matter the most, but often get kind of pushed aside because, again, we're trying to accomplish all this at work. We're really passionate about what we do, and sometimes it's hard. It's hard to prioritize that. But for me, it's been really scheduling, being really proactive about my schedule, and kind of, as much as I can, creating some boundaries. Growing while my kids were growing up. Now I'm an empty nester. Yay. But when my kids were growing up, it was super important that we had Friday nights together. So Friday nights was we used to get takeout from the same place and watch a movie every Friday night. And it sounds silly, but that was really important to us. And so even if I was going into work Saturday morning, at least I would have Friday night with them. And having those kinds of things where you draw a boundary and you say, this is important to me and I want to, as much as I can, do this, then you kind of have to schedule appropriately and plan ahead. But yeah, the balance is tricky, but definitely doable.
And now that you mentioned that, I think it is being intentional with your time, because I was just thinking about it as you were talking. My dad, I never thought about it. Like growing up, his operations was 24/7, and he was in a leadership role. And I think as a child and then now as an adult, I think it is being present, making time for your kids, having those traditions that you stick to, because that's the things that I remember. We had Friday night traditions that the moment I probably took for granted, but now looking back on him, that was like his, he always stuck to them, and it was his being intentional with his time and being present. Right.
Absolutely. Yeah. Now that my kids are older, they recognize it. At the time, they just thought, oh, yay, everybody's home for Friday. What a coincidence. Right. And it's like, it wasn't a coincidence. We made it happen. But yeah, they do look back on it now fondly.
Yeah, it's the traditions and the memories that are going to stick with us and our kids and other family, right, forever. So I like that. Okay, one last question specific to your role before I shift gears a little bit. In its simplest form, the number one function of my role is to blank.
Solve problems. It sounds general, but honestly, that's what it is. And it's so cliche. But it is. I like to say I'm dispatch. I just I'm triage, or I'm dispatch. Everything comes our way, and then we have to kind of piece that, who's actually responsible for it, how we can solve it. So I know that's what everyone probably says, but it's true. It's just solving problems and breaking them down into digestible bits, and it's exactly what I do. I mean,
it's the numbers and the math in you. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to ask you some questions about you personally. What's your favorite quote?
I have two. So my first is more personal for me to remember, which is that I have it written on my board. A flower does not think of competing with the flower next to it. It just blooms. And that's something that I have to remember, because I tend to compare myself and where I am and everything. And so sometimes I have to remember it doesn't matter. I just need to bloom. And then my other one.
Unique. You don't want to be like everybody else. You want to be
exactly.
Unique.
Exactly. I'm on my own path. I'm doing my own thing. It's not like anyone else's. So that's one of my personal favorites. And then one for my team is, it always seems impossible until it's done. Because sometimes things can be overwhelming. And again, breaking it down into smaller chunks. And then it's done, and you're like, oh, why did we stress so much?
Yeah, I get it. Now on to the next problem
exactly.
or task. What is your favorite book?
So when I read for pleasure. I listen to podcasts and other things for my brain. But reading is purely enjoyment for me. So my favorite book is actually a fiction book. It's 11/22/63 by Stephen King. It's really interesting. It's like historical fiction, and kind of goes through the JFK assassination, but like from all these different perspectives. Just to me, it was really interesting. If I engage with the books where I'm like researching things on the side, that's like a big indicator for me that I'm highly engaged with it. So that for sure takes the cake.
I'm gonna have to look that one up.
Yeah, I'm trying to get my husband to read it now, but it's a huge book, and he's like, well, maybe I'll take it. Yeah. So not for everyone.
Hobbies outside of work, other than going over old cheers.
Yeah, you know me. I really love being outdoors. So we like to hike. I love going to professional sporting events. That's
something we have in common.
Yes. I love going to football games, love going to baseball games, all day, every day. Newly discovered that I love hockey, so that's new. That's never expected to like that. And then just generally, spending time with my family when I can. They're spread throughout the country now at different colleges. And so anytime I get to have all of them together is a happy time for me.
It's a win-win.
Yes.
Any morning or evening routines that you would recommend to others?
Oh, I wish somebody would recommend one for me. So in the mornings I do, like, I'll scroll through LinkedIn. I scroll through newspaper or, electronic newspapers. I do that, but I'm not consistent about it. And so I'm working on consistency. At nighttime, I do have a couple things that I do recommend, that I do every night and that I do recommend. And one of them is either formally write it down or think of a couple things you're grateful for the day. It's really helped me over the last year and a half or so, kind of reframe my experiences for the day. And so I used to write them down, and then I got to a point where sometimes I couldn't. So I started just saying them out loud or thinking them to myself. But every night before bed, I think of a few things I'm grateful for.
I like that one. And we actually started a tradition of doing that at dinner. And I think that's a good one for the kids too, right?
Yes, that's great. I wish I had done things like that with the kids when they were younger. So good job.
It's never too late. You can call them and ask them.
I know. They're college kids. They don't care.
What are your sources of inspiration?
people. I know I keep saying it, but people inspire me, especially people who have a much different background or a much different perspective. I love learning from people who have had completely different experiences. Like Andrea Ferguson, like, every time I sit with her and I hear one of her new adventures, it's very inspiring. And then I get inspired by people who have gone through significant trauma, because I know what it's like to come back from those kinds of things.
Yeah.
And so I really get inspired by people who have stories of redemption, I guess. So those are a lot of the things, but in general, people every day, they just make me really inspired.
Any advice you would give to your younger self?
Get a mentor earlier, and make it more official, and get that guidance early on. I just don't think I don't think I appreciated that for what it was until a little bit later in my career. So yeah, I probably would look back and say, that, and also give myself grace a little bit. I jokingly, maybe not so jokingly, say I have imposter syndrome, where I'm always worried that, like, am I doing everything I'm supposed to? Am I doing things right? Am I on the right path? And the logical side of me is like, yes, stick to the plan. You're doing great. But when I was younger, I was very hard on myself, and if I could give advice to younger Sarah, I would say give yourself grace and be kind to yourself, because that was something I wasn't so good at before.
And I can relate to that one too. And I think that is important. So I've tried to instill that in the kids, because I feel like I was really hard on myself, too focused on school, and not just enjoying the little simple things around me. Right. So I think
Exactly.
that no matter actually what age or where you're at in your life, career, take a moment to appreciate the things around you and not take anything for granted.
100%.
So the question we always end with, 3 tips to take your career to the next level, by Sarah Webster.
Trademark. So my first one is to never turn down an opportunity to learn. And I don't mean necessarily formal, although if you are interested in a role that requires a degree, by all means pursue those technical education requirements. But I'm talking about more never turning down an opportunity to learn from people in your organization. If you get invited to a meeting and you're like, this doesn't have anything to do with me, why am I here? Take it all in, learn from it, apply it to something else. But every opportunity to learn, you should take it. And so a lot of learning happens through just exposure and osmosis. And so putting yourself in positions or situations where you're learning slowly, you'd be surprised how much it sinks in.
Or you find your next passion, right? So
exactly. And then my second one would be to surround yourself with a group of people, maybe I'm going to call them trusted advisors, but people whose perspectives you appreciate and respect, even if they're different than yours, and keep maintaining those relationships, because sometimes you'll run across somebody and you'll have a conversation and you really like the conversation, but you don't keep that conversation going. So I always say, get a group of people whose opinions you trust, that you can bounce ideas off of, that have different viewpoints, because our viewpoints, we know what we think, so it's good to get an outside perspective. And then third, I would say, this is something that over the last year and a half has been new for me, but my third piece of advice is actually kind of personal, is just take care of your personal wellness. I do strongly believe that there is a strong correlation between your personal well-being and your professional well-being. So my third piece of advice is to take care of yourself, your physical and mental health, take care of your family, and take care of the people close to you, because all of that will help you in your professional life, bring clarity, help you prioritize mentally, and I've over the last year and a half really focused on that, and I feel so much better at work and at home. So yeah, those are my nuggets.
I love them. Thank you so much, Sarah, and thank you for joining us today. And for all of our listeners, please check out nextlevelcareers.com, and thank you for tuning in today.
Thank you.
Check out more episodes at thenextlevelcareers.com.